it with your right shoulder a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, tell us when we're rolling.
We can pick up where we left.
Okay, so we were talking about Tommy Cochran, but I think we jumped back to Stratton in '64.
Yeah. I had, we'll go back to '65. The magazine sold when only 6 months after I had come to Denver, and it sold to New York City, and I didn't want to go to New York City, so I took on the ski school at Loveland Basin because it was available. And we did very well there, and we had some ski races there on their avalanche slope, and I again was always distressed that so few people watched ski races. So I had a PA system set up, and I knew all of the races in those days, and I got at the bottom on the PA system, and I said, here comes Linda Tikalski-Myers down the course, and she is a good rut skier. She has a good chance to win this race, and watch how late she takes her turns. Oh, she took a little, talking down this way. And I'm getting too loud. People began to watch. In fact, nobody was riding the lifts because they were all watching the race, because it was fascinating. For the first time, they heard racers' names, they heard what was going on, and they could understand something about it. And in any case, my notoriety spread, and somebody back east said, Doug, could you come and help us jazz up the pro skiers? They weren't getting the audiences they wanted. And so we cooked up a scheme, which they'd already tried briefly at Great Gorge, New Jersey, to do a sort of to shill an audience, to bring them in. And that was having the pros ski free, do some tricks and stunts. And so I expanded on that at Stratton Mountain in 1965, and we had Otmar Schneider and Pepe Gramshammer and Anderl Molter, all the champions from 1960 Olympics, and Stein Eriksen. And Stein did not do his somersault because he felt that was unfair because nobody else did it. But in any case, the audience was thrilled. The lift operators on the mountain complained that nobody was riding the lifts because all 2,000 of the people there were watching the event. And then, as I was instructed, said, all right, folks, now you've seen the pros get it on freestyle. Let's go across the other side now and watch them in the race, go through the gates. Yeah, everybody disappointed and went and got on the chairlifts. And so we ended up with 200 people watching the race. And I realized, number one, if you want an audience on the mountain, you can only make it last not more than 45 minutes to an hour. Secondarily, you've got to inform them to what's going on. And thirdly, you've got to make it accessible to people to get to the event and so on. And fourth, I realized later on, it didn't matter if you only had 10 people watching the race if it was on national television, because then you could easily have 10 million. And I used that argument in conning sponsors into supporting me, like Chevrolet to support freestyle skiing. No, that was in 1965. That spring I went to Waterville Valley where Tom Corcoran was developing what became wonderful Waterville Valley. At that time there was one downhill trail. It was Mount Tecumseh, and it was a racing trail, and you had to hike up before you could race down. It was called the last of the walk-up races. At that race I said, Tom Corcoran was an Olympian. In 1960 he missed by that much from getting third place. And I said, Corcoran, you Olympians go straight pretty good and you go left and right pretty good, but can you really get it on in free skiing? And he says, yeah, I know what you're saying. And I said, let's cook up a competition to find the best man on the mountain. He said, talk to me in a couple of years, Pfeiffer, when I've opened up this mountain and I have a run called True Grit developed. So a few years later, 1970, at the Boston Ski Show, Corcoran says, Pfeiffer, put your mouth where your money is. We're going to have this competition you've been talking about, and we'll make it a pro-am event. And he says, you get a sponsor and give me some pages in Skiing Magazine and we'll do it. So we sat down and drew out the rough format for the first, well, Dick Barrymore and I had talked about this previously about having fun. He did it. He beat me by a week at Aspen on the Ridge at Bell with his first hot dog competition, which was wild and exciting, and got the ball really rolling as far as freestyle skiing was going. And we had our competition a week later, and
Sponsored?
It was sponsored by Chevrolet, yes. And we did it in one run. People came down. True Grit was really a bumpy run. Then we built a few big bumps for them to get some aerials. And then where the transition was into the alluvial fan, it was smooth and good stuff for tricks. And I insisted that we do tricks on this because you're not a real acrobatic skier or a flexible skier or all-around skier if you can't do a few simple tricks. We did it in one run. I didn't like the idea because it's hard to judge. But Corcoran was the host, and we did it, and we had Jean-Claude Killy as a judge, and Deb Jennings, and Corcoran's wife, and a few other people. Bill Paulies, who's here now with us. And it was a great success. It happened that Pete Seibert was there. Pete Seibert was the founder of Vail, and a former 10th Mountain guy, and an expansive, generous soul. And he saw this competition, and I said, Pete, Vail has the perfect amphitheater to do another one of these, right at Lookmont, mid-Vail. He said, no, you're right. What would it take? Pfeiffer, get a sponsor and we'll do it. I turned to the Chevrolet people, and we had courage to them. We gave the marketing director a private instructor, and he'd never skied before, and he brought his family, and of course he fell in love with the sport. And I went to him and said, Al, do you think you could get me another $10,000 to put on another event? Well, that's a lot of money. I'll think about it. Okay, I've thought about it. We'll do it. Just about that fast. So the second one was at Vail a month later. That would have been 1971, and here we are in 76. That's a few years ago.
2006.
And it grew from there. And at that point, when we came to Vail, I was in charge then, and I didn't have to compromise with Tommy Corcoran. And we set up the events as 3 events, which was mogul skiing or bump skiing, aerial skiing, and ballet skiing, tricks ballet skiing. Now, I had gotten into tricks and ballet skiing as a young kid in high school. I used to go to the library as often as I could and pick up this book, which is filled with shots of Hannes Schneider's actions. Why don't we shoot this
We'll shoot
separately?
That after.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come to it. We'll just shoot it.
You know, these movie sequences of these guys going on, doing horrendous things. In 1926 to 1930, they were doing this. Another book was this one, Dr. Fritz Loyal's Möglichkeiten im Skilauf, which means new possibilities in skiing.
And that's old too.
Pardon? This is a
We'll
nine.
shoot that after.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this looks like what do you? Perfect. Talk about it now.
Yeah. Dr. Fritz Royal, he was not a very good skier. He was an Austrian ice skater, and he was trying to bring ice skating events into skiing. Now, he had nothing to do with freestyle skiing. Now people say that he did, but I liked his ideas of doing the Royal Christie. That looks like, Dr. Fritz Rule it looks like, but it's pronounced Royal. So we have the Royale, people say sometimes, but it's really Fritz Royal's Christie's. And the fact that on smaller hills skiing can get boring, if you learn to do stunts and things, it's fun. So I started at our events saying the roots of freestyle skiing go back to Dr. Fritz Royal. And so they think he's the inventor of freestyle skiing. He was proposing ice skating movements on skis. And they're really quite funny, as you can see from these pictures.
So did it happen at Vail with three events? And
We did all 3 events at Vail, and it worked out very well. And the next year we went back to Waterville, and came back to Vail, and the program was getting more and refined. It was very exciting because at every event we saw things, the skiers do things that had never before been seen on skis. Now, we called it initially the first international championships of exhibition skiing because I wanted a show. I wanted these guys to show off. I wanted them to be exhibitors. They were hot dogs, you know. And we called it international because I used some of that money from Chevrolet to give money to a young Canadian called Wayne Wong, who came all the way from Vancouver, to a couple of Canadians from Montreal and Toronto who came down. We helped defray their costs. And the Chevrolet, the Corvette, for $6,000. I had the $4,000 left to play with, and we used that other $2,000 for prize money and the other $2,000 as appearance money. So we called it international.
So you had a Corvette.
And yes, and Herman Gellner, who became famous for doing his Möbius flip in Roger Brown's film, got the Corvette. And then we did the same thing at Vail, and a guy called Fritzi Garharmer, who was a German ski instructor here, won the event. And he was so enchanted, he went back to Germany and spread the sport there, and was instrumental in helping it become an Olympic sport some 20 years later.
Any television coverage? Did you guys work TV? Did television come into play?
Television came in almost immediately. When we did it at Vail the second time, there was an NBC basketball player here, ex-basketball player, who was under contract with NBC, I believe, to do basketball events. He was the color commentator on this program. And he saw that and said, oh man, this is exciting. And he went either to ABC, I think, and said, this is a great program, we should sponsor one of these. And so they did the next year. And it grew from there. Once it got on television, it even made Saturday Night Live in a pejorative way, unfortunately, because these guys in those days were not trained gymnasts, and they would go up and do their somersaults and crash. And Saturday night had some guy with a gun there, they'd play this thing, and they'd go, bang! Another one hits the dust! And the guy would come off the jump and fall on his face, bang! And gave us a bad name. There was a lot of illicit substance around in the early days, not so much on the part of the competitors as in the audience. We had some very funny things happen in that regard. At Sun Valley, then we expanded, we did an event in Sun Valley and then in Waterville Valley, so we began to have a circuit of 4 events and 4 major events, all covered by television. And because we were getting the attention and the sponsorship money, the United States Ski Association and the ski racers began to get very jealous and paranoid, and they gave us no end of trouble as far as sanctioning. They even went so far as to get the National Ski Areas Association to ban aerial acrobatic maneuvers on their mountains, or to recommend that they ban it. So we had our struggles, and we had supposedly drugs, sex, and booze, and so on. And then partly it was an underground countercultural movement to begin with. But I likened it to the creation of jazz in America and jazz dancing. It was an original American folk art, body dance. Nothing like it in Europe existed, nowhere else. It was a real triumph to me of the American freestyle spirit. And at that time there was a little book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, who some people still read. It's about a seagull who transgresses the bounds of known flight to seagulls and goes at tremendous speeds and does incredible stunts. And this was most inspiring to the 16 to 20-year-olds back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And they were looking for new questions. They knew all the answers. All the old folks knew the answers. They wanted new questions. And so it was a quest for newness. And it was a quest for freedom of expression, just like jazz and jazz dance. And there were, because of the particularly earliest competitions, we got a notoriety for drugs and booze. But there were really serious competitors like Wayne Wong and Scott Brooksbank and later on John Eves and so on, who recognized that this was a legitimate sport, and they trained for it year round. And they began to build jumps to jump. Jake Spirit, Stowe, had a little lake up there, built a ramp, and so he could jump in, practices his swan dives into the lake. And other people did the same thing. Up in Minnewaca, a wealthy family called the Bador family, and their son Frankie Bador, I think, was world champion 3 times in a row. An incredible athlete, but he could train on the water skiing ramps on Lake Minnewanka, I think, in Minnesota, and they also built slides to jump into the water, and trampolines. And then in Salt Lake City, a guy called Bob Theobald convinced an international gymnastic judge called Charlie Pond, who had a gym center in Salt Lake City, to start training the athletes. And there a guy called Commander Red Meeks, who I taught to ski in 1945, developed the ring belt. I'm not sure what they call it, so with the cords. When the guys get on the trampoline, they can jump up and down, and the assistants pull the ropes to prevent them from stumbling. But with the ring, they were able to go into their twists. And from then on, freestyle jumping took an incredible leap forward.
Now, were there legal problems? I mean,
the legal problems came about, of course, with the paraplegics that happened, the first 2 or 3 guys. And it began hard to get insurance. And that was on the basis that the National Ski Areas Association recommended ski areas don't allow particularly inverted areas.
Now, did somebody in Canada kind of save freestyle? Or?
In Canada, it was banned here, but Canada did not ban aerial freestyles or freestyle competitions. And a guy called Johnny Johnson in Canada was sponsored by, I think, Molson Beer to be the sort of the guru of freestyle, or the political or the lobbyist for freestyle. And he, and in this country, a fellow is here now, his name is Charles Sanders, lobbied the FIS and the USSSA, and they brought discipline to the still undisciplined professional freestylers and made it an amateur sport, and they gave the pros a year's amnesty. If they didn't compete for money, they could become amateurs again. And so it became a sanction by the United States Ski Association, and the same thing happened in Europe. So it was sanctioned by the FIS, the Fédération Internationale de Ski, International Ski Federation. And gradually, Breckenridge here in Colorado held aerial activities on private land at a place called Quandary near Breckenridge, so they didn't have to worry about the Forest Service or the USSA, and that's what kept it alive. Meanwhile, there were mogul contests around the country, sponsored ones, that kept it going. And ballet was not too exciting ever, but it kept going, and once it got sanctioned by the FIS and the USSA, then it blossomed again.
Who were some of the great female ballet stars?
That came about at the first event, at Sun Valley. Susie Chaffee, who loved to do dance routines simple dance routines on her skills, very lyrical, with flowing ribbons and veils and things. She was doing sort of a dance of 7 veils on skis, and she wore her headphones. And one day at Sun Valley, I said, Susie, why don't you give me your headphones and I'll put it on the loudspeaker so you can dance to that? And she said, okay. And everybody liked it, and we ended up, the next year we had our own orchestra providing the music for the guys. So Susie Chaffee was the pioneer ballet skier, and in those days it was the beginning of women's libs movement in 1972, and all the guys said, sure, Susie, you can compete with us, but on our terms, you know. We're not setting up a special women's category here. It's just we're all freestyle skiers. So she did that, but we realized the difference. And Chevrolet managed to kick in another $1,000 special prize money for the women. And it grew from there. And then we had people like Gania Fuller who raised the art. We had the Post-Toasty twins, who are an outgrowth of what was called the Style Masters in New England, come in, and John Clendenin, who was 4 times world champion freestyler, but we just called it World Championships. So they call themselves World Championships, which is great for them. And and John Clendenin. Phil Gerard was the guru of ballet skiing. He had a ski deck in California, and he taught these people. He was a trained dancer from Broadway and had performed in a number of Broadway shows, and he knew the very rigorous training that Broadway dancers go through. And he brought this this discipline of dancing to freestyle ballet skiers. With, you know, instead of them just doing awkward movements, he said, you go to a line to the infinity. You know, stretch your arm, reach for infinity, like it looks like you're going on forever. You know, this kind of dance stuff. And the ballet became much more lyrical. And then we had guys like Greg Stump, the young guy from Maine, who came as a mime, and he would do as if he were pulling himself on a rope, you know. And then another one, Alan Schoenberger, who is still going strong with a very elaborate theatrical production on a belt. He called himself the Puppet Man, and he did wonderful mime shows. But this was not contemporary with what skiers wanted. And ballet skiing gradually got, I call them homophobes, macho guys. And they started calling the ballet stuff the belle faggotry. And there was a real put down. They made it very acrobatic and very masculine, very athletic. They might as well be using horses and ramps and, I mean, you know, the springboard, the gymnastic horses and rings and things. So, and they got it too intricate. The level of difficulty depended on whether you had the left foot crossed over the right foot or the right pole crossed over the thing, and twirling around and how you switched and forth. It was hard to judge. It was boring for people to watch, and it gradually lost interest in television. I think they tried it in 1988 as a demonstration sport at the Calgary Olympics, and it got such poor ratings, they dropped it as for television coverage. I deplore that because I still think ballet trick skiing is a wonderful way to develop athleticism in young skiers and on small hills, and for people who are not macho-oriented and driven by acrobatics, but who like to dance. You know, it's the difference between frugging and jitterbugging and ballet and ballroom dancing. And I wish we could convince the Olympics to do it. Now, I tried to get it onto the Olympics. And I knew at that time the president of the FIS, a guy called Mark Hodler, who was the I can't say the dictator because he wasn't, but he was the administrator of ski racing worldwide. And I talked with him several times, and he said, Doug, please, you want to bring a judging event Moguls have to be judged, aerials have to be judged, ballet has to be judged. You want to bring this to the Olympics. Now, do you think we don't have enough trouble with international judges on ice skating or ski jumping? And now you want to bring international judges into skiing? Get lost. So it took people like Jack Sanders, rather, whom I mentioned previously, to convince the FIS and the USSA. Then I tried to have it made as a demonstration sport, 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid. There, I was informed by the president of the IOC, said, Doug, forget it. Lake Placid would like to have curling made their demonstration sport, because if they have curling, they will get federal monies to build a curling rink, which will be a wonderful tourist attraction for them. What will ballet skiing do for them?
What do you think now, when you look at the moguls and the aerials? Do you feel that, you know,
It's supreme athleticism. The aerials are death-defying circus acts. It's not germane to real skiing, but nonetheless it's great athleticism and great gymnastics. And I would imagine that trampoline artists really envy the hang time that the aerial jumpers get today. Hang time meaning how long they're in the air. You know, you can't, off a trampoline, you're not in the air long enough to do a triple twisting jump and these incredible things that they're doing. The mogul skiing is a zipper run now. It's right down. It's not pure skiing. It's great athleticism. And they have the built-in jumps and they do this. Mogul skiing, we used to give them a raw field of moguls and let them tear at it. You know, if they could get in aerials safely, so be it. They did. They got extra points for that. But they made long turns and round turns and over here and then back over here. Now it's zip. And how do they make points? You'll notice that they've got patches on their knees so that the judges can tell whether or not their knees come apart. Every time their knees come apart, they lose a point or a tenth of a point or something. That's skiing for you? For me, I look at these guys and there are at least 5 of them who are winners. Same thing with ice skating. There are at least 5 people who are winning, and they just get by first place by a personal prejudice of the judge on some little thing. Well, he had his little pinky waving, you know, or some such insignificant attribute. And that's why we called it, in the beginning, exhibition skiing, because I wanted it to be a show. And I knew that as it went along, it would have to get more and more formalized. In the beginning, the competitors they weren't competitors, they were performers. Right at the starting gate, they were saying, Charlie, I think you ought to go a little higher or a little bit. They're telling their fellow competitors how to outdo them. You know. But then as money came in, that free spirit began to go out of it. It began to get more and more competitive. And you'd see them off by themselves, rethinking their routine instead of sharing it. So it became a competition. And it became, and we called it freestyle skiing at the advice of this Bud Palmer with ABC Television. He said, Doug, do we have to call it exhibition skiing? And I said, no, what do you think? And he said, Doug, we need a competition. People want competition. They want to see people win. I said, okay, let's call it freestyle competition. Freestyle championships. So that's how freestyle got into the name. But originally it was an underground countercultural movement. Just what's recapitulated it totally is snowboarding. Snowboarding came in as a counterculture movement by the radical skateboarders and surfers. And they were despised by skiers, and they were obnoxious and used pretty rough, crude language. Not that freestylers ever did, but the snowboarders did. And they were unpopular. And it took a while to clean up their act, get them in line. But it's the same kind of, we had our legal battles and trying to form our associations and organizations and competitions, and so did the snowboarders. And they had trouble they formed their own national organization at one point. But it was eventually absorbed into the USSA. Once USSA realized, oh, there's sponsorship money there, and this is going to be a legitimate sport, let's legitimize it. But it went through exactly the same procedures.
Now, I'm going to change gears on you
Yeah.
totally here, where we got a little tape left. Why is ski history important? Why would you tell people to learn something about ski history?
Because I'm involved in it. Ski history, any history is important for the reason that if you don't know your history, you will repeat the same mistakes that were made in the past. Now, skiing is not an earth-shaking, critical, international concern, but nevertheless, the organizational things of skiing repeat themselves. Well, I think I better backtrack here. I think it's important. We consider important because we want to keep the names alive of the old timers and the things that they did, and keep the young people aware that there is a heritage. The skiing didn't begin the day you bought your pair of skis. Any sport is of the same, has the same problems. It all has a history, and especially as you get older, you want the young people to recognize that you were part of that history, and so I guess you want to keep it alive. It's possibly an ego trip, totally. But it's, why is it important? You can totally ignore the past. Why is it important to leave an old building in the middle of new high-rises and things? Because it reminds you that things were once much more difficult, that people paved the way to make it easier for you, and that you owe some obligation to your antecedents. And that's partly what we're doing. We started the organization in part, the Skiing Heritage Journal, because we deplored the lack of historical knowledge of the ski riders 10 years ago. Partly because there are not the resources. Where are the libraries of these things? Still true today. Where can you go to find the history of skiing? And we're trying to correct that so that if people want to know the truth and find the way, the thread of from then to now, there are resources to do that.
Is Eric, the camaraderie important through?
Is the what?
The camaraderie, the culture, passing that along?
Skiing now, to me, has become much too commercial. We were in a bar yesterday at a town called Leadville, Colorado. And there's the old Silver Dollar Saloon there, where the 10th Mountain Boys used to come over from Camp Hale on their free time and have a beer or two. And in that bar there was a character, a hangout of the bar, and I bought him a beer and started talking with him. And one of the things he says, "Doug, you know what a pygmy is?" "Of course I know what a pygmy is." "Do you know what a digmy is?" "No." He says, "Those are the people that come from Vale and Aspen and say, 'Dig me, dig me.' In their fancy clothes and their fancy gear. Dig me, dig me." So that's what skiing has become in large part. It has become a theme park. You go out and you play for a few hours and you come back, and you go to your condominium and you plug in the TV. We used to come down from skiing and have a beer and sing songs and play games, party games, and we used to have to climb a lot. There was much more time to get to know people. You had to make your own entertainment as you did, and that before television, huh? So it's not the same thing, and I'm not sure. Maybe ski history is dead from now on. Maybe there is no ski history. Maybe we have to go back to our antecedents. Look at the technology has we used to have great technological inventions, improvements through the years, going from long skis to shorter skis, to adding steel edges, to mechanical bindings, and to release bindings, then to shaped skis, and to ski boots. Look at the progression of ski boots from the old soft leather boots to the modern plastic wonders of today. But what's new? Is there anything? It's been the same, just like automobiles. What's new in automobiles, pretty much? They changed the body style, but it's the same old car underneath. Of course, there have been a lot of technological changes. But what's in it for the history from now on? Tennis rackets, you know, they've got the big shapes. Where can we go from here? Maybe we've reached the end. Who are going to be the innovators? Maybe we have to go back to our roots to recreate these things. And that's where history comes in, because this is in all things, people borrow old ideas, as it's often said. There's nothing new. There's just a change in the way things were done or made. You know? But the basic idea is still there. So I'm wondering about if there is a future for the history of skiing, of current history. And many of you my age recall that you wanted to go skiing. How did you go? You got 6 friends together to share the gas and to be able to help push the car out of the snowbank or out of the ruts. And you got snowed in, and you shared accommodations in converted farmhouses and things. There was entertainment. Well, you had candlelight and coal oil lanterns in Vermont, but you didn't have electricity in a lot of those places, and you didn't have television. You didn't even have, you maybe had radio with one static station coming in, static prone station coming in. You had to make do, and I think we've lost that. I remember as a child in elementary school the fun that we had taking a spool, an empty spool, cutting notches around the rim, running a rubber band through it with a matchstick on the other end and another matchstick on the other end sticking out a bit, and we would cut little circles out of candle wax to make washers. And you'd wind this thing up, and we'd have races with our race cars made out of spools, you know, simple things like that. And pea shooters made out of clothespins. You know, it was a make-do thing. You got a great deal of satisfaction of making your own toys and playing with them.
So skiing was like that.
And skiing was like that too. We made our own Amstutz springs out of inner tube, bicycle inner tubes. Amstutz springs, that spring that goes from the strap around your ankle to a latch on the back of the ski, you know, supposedly to hold the heel down a little better. And then we used inner tubes with that, with a bent nail to hold them.
Well, maybe Aisha helps people appreciate those old days.
I'm wondering if people do appreciate that. If you look at the old movies, such as in this book, you'll wonder at how these people, they had free heels. You know, just the toe was grabbed onto the ski with a strap that held the heel, and it gave it some stability. But they skied incredible things. They jumped off the roofs of the hay barns in Austria and Switzerland, and skied in deep snow with their old equipment, no steel edges even. And you look at one, and you see the athleticism of these people with such simple equipment. And the joy of skiing is still there. It's marvelous to look at the movies of this, like Der Weiße Rausch, the white
Ecstasy.
White ecstasy. And they're out there. It's free. They do what they want coming down. You know, that was real freestyle skiing in those days. Now it's all controlled. Everything is grouped. Thank goodness it's easy on our old knees. And you ride up and you wear your fancy clothes, and every year you get your new equipment to show off to your neighbors. It's still fun nonetheless. But without hardship, I don't think you build great camaraderie. Nylon only came in after the war, nylon windbreakers. We used to get sopping wet. I don't know how we stood it. We would put on our pajamas. We put our long johns on first, then we would put on our pajamas, then we would put on our baggy pants. then we would put on a woolen undershirt, then we would put on a woolen overshirt, then we would put on a sweater, and then we would put on a second sweater. And if we had the money, we would wear a jacket made of Grenfell cloth, and we
We
would.
better save this minute. Let's just shut off so we can do that cutaway. I just want to shut the camera off.
You want this like this?
Yeah. And then we can do the same thing with the other book. It'll be easy.
Okay. How long do you want this?
That's good.
Okay, let's try, okay, open it, try it out.
Get up.
And we'll just keep it on there for a while.
Okay, maybe you could zoom into Wonders of Skiing. Okay, and come out from it now.
Now let me see if it has a.
You got it?
That shot, you mean, of all the,
No,
Okay, so, you know, we can go.
if there was just. No, it doesn't have one to them.
you're looking for a title page? Yeah. No, I think you did. And if you start at the
Let me
top of
get
the
a more exciting one here.
Rolling.
Oh, that's good. We could do that again on the other side of the page. Plenty there, plenty. Thank you.
Okay.
We did it. That was a long interview. You're due at
I hope I wasn't expecting to host. Oh Jesus!
the cocktail party?
Is it a cocktail party?
Yes, it's a cocktail party first and then the dinner.
The movie first, they said.
Yes,
At 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.